Welcome to Star Trek Lost Stars. My name is Tony Morrow, and it's going to be a good one today. As you saw in the potential thumbnail for this video, if you're catching us on YouTube or the Twitch description and stream, you'll notice that today we're going to be talking about espionage and spies, and there's, of course, a reason for that. But if you are joining us for the very first time and you have no idea what I'm talking about, then hi, my name's Tony, and this is Star Trek Lost Stars. Star Trek Lost Stars is a 4X game where we explore new space, expand our borders, exploit resources that we find, and exterminate the enemies who oppose us. This is a 4X game that's based on a rule set called Federation and Empire, published by the Amarillo Design Bureau. We play this normal tabletop game in an online format that we bring live to you here on YouTube and Twitch, and our campaign is called Star Trek Lost Stars. So, welcome. For those of us, I see we've got 3 folks joining us here on YouTube, one on Twitch. I'm monitoring the chat, my tablet here for YouTube, and over on the left here on Twitch. So feel free to chime in the chat to say where you're coming in from, where you're watching from. Do you have any experience with Federation Empire, or are you just a Star Trek fan? Let's start off today. We're going to do this in sort of 2 phases. The first phase will be just a quick turn update on where we are. We are currently in turn 89, waiting for that to come back. And I'll give you an update on turn 89. There are some big developments that have occurred for the Klingon Empire in that turn. And then based on some of those developments, we're going to start talking about espionage and the spy versus spy game as it plays out in our campaign. So without further ado, let me switch over to the map. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the map. For those of you, again, who are just joining us, we do this using a platform called Vassal. This is Vassal that you're seeing here on the screen, which is basically a tabletop simulator that allows us to be able to play this 4X game here. I'll zoom out real quick so you can see the big scale of the map. As you can see, it's kind of a hexagonal map at this time. You've got 5 factions or 5 players playing. We've got Big Red, as I refer to it. In the top left, that is the Tholian Empire for Star Trek fans. Let me switch my sides here. My face is really in the way. All right, so we got Big Red on the top left. In the middle, with that big wedge-shaped border, you've got the Paravian Empire. For those who don't know anything about Paravians, they're basically Gorns with feathers. We've got the Federation in the bottom right corner, Big Blue. And in the bottom left corner, we have what I'm affectionately calling the Batman faction, because their color scheme is yellow and black, and their ships quite literally look like bats. I'll zoom in real quick so you can see that. I mean, come on. Does that not look like a bat to you? So the Batman faction, I affectionately call them, they are technically the Borak, sort of a minor race that's in the Starfleet universe. And the player who's playing them is also the game master. He is playing it as though they are Starcom from Battletech. And then at the very top, in the top right, we have the Klingon Empire. So even though this is a 4X war game that we play using this system, we include role-playing and we do role-playing and different aspects of gameplay to be able to sort of flush out just the tabletop war piece into a more sort of well-rounded role-playing game. So let's talk about this. This is turn 89. You can see here, just as a quick recap of the things that we already had on the go. On the top right-hand corner, you can see that there is this minor empire that we are slowly sort of chipping away at. I will pull them up. They are an ISC faction, and they currently have the ISC home fleet as their fleet in this space. You can see here that they have a total of 12 Y-era planetary ground bases, which is the fundamental reason why we are having such a difficult time getting into these guys. You can see that they have in the fleet box right here behind my head, you can see that they have a series of crippled ships. So these are ships that are damaged and cannot fight at their full effectiveness. A cruiser, 2 light cruisers, and a total of 9 frigates, all Y era. And then, of course, they have a Y dock. So that's the biggest kind of starbase in the Y era, and it has 3 SIDs worth of damage, equivalent of 12 points of damage against it. One more SID and it will be crippled, which is significant because once it's crippled, it cannot repair other ships. So expecting that this will fall in the next turn or two. And then we have, of course, the Tholian Empire on the left, where we have a little bit of contact here along the border that you can see. In the sort of southwestern section, you can see that there is a couple of blue ships here. This is from a gravity well, or an out of a gravity well, kind of like a one-way wormhole, where a bunch of ships have popped up. We have the border along with the Paravians, and you can see that they are slowly, as I move ships out of the way here, they are slowly building a base network along there. And they have a number of these vassalized minor empires, just like the one we have in the top right. Basically, through role play, they've created a scenario where the vassalized empires pay a certain percentage of their economy, and they're able to maintain their home fleets. And then on the southern border for us, the Klingon Empire, we have our border with the Federation. You can see here that the Federation is, I'll just remove the ships for a second, very well set up with a YDK and a number of YBSs, Y-era base stations and Y-era space dock. And then, of course, they have a number of ships along here. We can see that we have the big sort of fleets to note are Second Fleet. So I'll pull up Second Fleet here. And you can see that they have no significant change from what they had before. So they have a number of these Corvette-style ships, which are the VTMs, a couple of Y-era or 3 Y-era frigates, a couple of Y-era destroyers, 3 Y-era light cruisers, 3 modern or middle-era light cruisers, a Y-era cruiser, and then it's an OCA, an old cruiser, but it's a middle era or M era cruiser. So that fleet has not changed substantially. And then the big one of note is Third Fleet, which you will see. Let me move my head once again. You will see Third Fleet is right here. And they are comprised of a total of 9 of these middle or, I keep referring to it as modern, middle era light cruisers, 6 middle era frigates, 3 of these corvettes, and then 2 cruisers. So a much more significant fleet. And in response, of course, we've been building up our defenses or our fleet on this side of the border. This is, of course, the wormhole that we have that is very close to our homeworld. And as you can see here, we have Green Fleet and the Reserve Fleet. So we pull up the Klingon Empire for first reserves. Here we are. So in the first reserve fleet, we have our Dreadnought. These are all middle era ships. Dreadnought, cruiser, and then a total of 9 of these escort / frigate style ships. And then in the greater Green Fleet, as we pull that up, you will see, that we have a total of, brain's not working very well today, 21 ships, the number's right there. 21 ships of the sort of the frigate era or the frigate size ships. So frigate ships, and essentially that's just to be able to balance out the total combat effectiveness of Third Fleet and ensure that they're not going to somehow get through that wormhole. Plug the hole, so to speak. So that's where we're at. Let's do a quick recap of economic points and fleet cap. So here we have economic points. You can see here that the Borak, again, the Batman faction, are at 62 and a half. Wow. That's quite a jump from where they were before. The Borak at 62 and a half, the Federation at 65 and a half, the Klingon Empire at 61. There's a reason for that. I'll fill you in on that in a moment. The Paravians at 53 and a half, and the Tholians also at 53 and a half. So when we talk about, and this is going to be important as we discuss this turn, as we talk about phases of initiative, the Paravians, because they were actually the Tholians, I think, were if we go back in the turns, they previously had initiative, as in they previously had the lowest economy. So the Tholians would go first, then the Paravians, followed by the Klingons, followed by the Borak, followed by the Federation. That would be the progression of initiative based on the size of economy. And don't worry about the neutral and neutrals, just all the different minor factions that we're talking about here. And then let's talk about fleet cap. And I'm going to pull up, as a comparison also, something called Compot. And so combat potential. That's actually not the one I want. That's not what I want. I want unit summary. Sorry. Unit summary or racial summary. Jane's fighting ships. So think of this as, like I say, Jane's fighting ships for this game. So let's do a quick recap. This is what we were counting before. So the total number of ships that the Borak have is 56. They have 56 ships in circulation, total attack factors of 112 to 242. You can see that their fleet cap is 241. That's the total defensive value of the ships that they have. Now, if I look down here, I don't believe that they've been involved in any fights and have crippled ships. So that would just indicate the number of ships that they, or the amount of fleet cap that they currently have available to them. The Federation has a total of 108 ships, which is down from 109 the previous turn. So interesting. They have a total of 334 attack, 457 defense, with a fleet cap of 464. Don't worry about Hydrons or the ISC. The Klingons have a total of 93 ships with a total attack factor of 312 and defense of 348. You'll notice how close those numbers are relative to the other factions. That's just because of the way the Klingon ships are the stats on Klingon ships. They tend to have more potent attack factors. And we have so many of those frigates that have a 4 attack, 3 defense. That's why you see that. And of course, our fleet cap is at 358. We see the Paravians have a total of 48 ships with 12209 respectively. And the Tholians, a total of 88 ships with a 119,308. So, yeah, that's where that sits. When we look at the unit summary, you can see that this is the total number of attack and defense factors based on bases and everything else. And we can break that down as we open this up, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to look at the total value. So you can see, again, Borak, total of 58 units. So that's ship equivalents. And they have a combined, and that's all their bases and everything combined. They have a total of 409 to 774. This kind of takes into consideration the amount of bases you have and sort of the infrastructure that you've built. The Federation is 583, 955 respectively. So that talks about how many bases they've built, and they have a significant number of YDKs that they've established. The Klingons are at 493, 722. So close, but obviously behind the Federation. The Paravians are at a 311, 591. And the Tholians at 332, 746. Now, that's a lot of numbers I'm just throwing at you, and I'm just throwing those out there for those of you who are sort of number inclined to be able to kind of look at that and touch base and see what that's like. But let's get into the nitty-gritty. What's changed? So first thing you'll see on this map, and I'll zoom in a little bit, is home fleet, which is normally positioned over top a wormhole. That wormhole is gone. So there's a YDK here that was previously built over top of a wormhole. The wormhole disappeared. In previous episode, I talked about the fact that wormholes can change, disappear. So for example, gravity wells can become full two-way wormholes. Wormholes can completely disappear. They can turn into gravity wells. All sorts of things can happen. So what's happened here, obviously, is that the wormhole has completely disappeared. And this is the second time in this game for the Klingons that wormholes have changed like this. We've previously had gravity wells that have just poofed into thin air, and this would be another example of something like that happening. Excuse me, but with regards to a wormhole. And that's really sort of valuable right now because that wormhole and its proximity to our home world was kind of a big concern, not only for us, but also where it popped up on the Tholian side, big red over to the left there, where it popped up for them as well was a big concern. So we've kind of neutralized that. However, one of the challenges is that we were running convoys, commercial convoys or trade back and forth between each other through that wormhole. And so now we're going to have to set that up along our border, which is perfectly fine. We'll just have to set that up. The second piece, which is interesting, is right here. So let me move the ships out of the way so you can kind of see. There is this white faction that showed up. So the whites, these guys, the white and black versus us, the black and white, are the Kzinti. The Kzinti is another faction within Federation and Empire. Think of them like tiger people. And they are just another minor faction. In this context, however, though, they're a minor faction that's popped up. And two things. One, we had an exploration freighter that went into that hex and discovered it and discovered these guys. They destroyed it. Just like what had happened with the ISC in the top right corner, they fired on and destroyed an unarmed exploration freighter. So, from a Klingon perspective, we don't take that very kindly, and we're going to get into the business of sorting that out. So, we'll talk about that in the next couple turns to see how things are going to evolve with regards to our response to that. But as you can see, it's also in a very interesting spot in the sense that it's very close to the border here. And if I bring the ships back, you can see that it's kind of nestled nestled in a spot that puts us in sort of a vulnerable position. If they were to take their fleet, and I'll show you their fleet in a second, and decided to reach out and start, banging up our bases, that could cause significant disruption. So it'll be important for us to sort that out sooner rather than later. But how much of a threat do they represent? Let's show you. So the Kzinti home fleet has, as you can see here, I'll bring it closer to my head. Whoop, closer to my head. So you can see here they have a command cruiser, and that's important because it can command 9 ships plus itself, so a total of 10 ships in any particular fight. They have this strike cruiser, which normally doesn't really mean much except that it typically has a higher attack factor. All of these are Y era ships with the exception of those W frigates. So lower technology level than what we have, but they are they're not insignificant. So the strike cruiser has a 3-6 attack. They also have a normal heavy cruiser which has a 3-6 attack, and then they have a total of 9 frigates and then 4 of these W era frigates. So 9 Y era frigates, 4 W era frigates, and then the thing that makes these guys so difficult to deal with is they also have 12 Y-era planetary ground bases. The Y-era planetary ground bases, and any planetary ground base for that matter, brings electronic warfare points to any battle, which can significantly change the amount of damage that the attacking party can inflict on the enemy. And it's sort of passive in their regard. They don't have to sacrifice any other statistics in order to maximize their electronic warfare, their EW. And as we've seen with our fight with the ISC faction, that yellow faction on the top right, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with these guys. So the good news is that will mean we have a prolonged period of limited war that we will be in while we're dealing with them. That has economic advantages. But from a security perspective, it's going to be challenging because they are in a really sort of bad spot. Don't really enjoy where they are, and it's a little frustrating. So we'll see how that goes. Just checking the chat here. No chat. Okay, good to go. So again, so the Kzinti have shown up. We've got the bases along here. Let me zoom out a little bit. Let's do a quick little look around and see how things are changing on the Fed side. So one of the things that I'd noticed about the Federation, they've been doing this for a little bit, but they've really built out their YDK network. They did not, so little history on this faction. So the individual who's playing this team, this faction, had played in a previous iteration of this game, and like another time that we played this, and he got kind of steamrolled because he wasn't prepared or didn't understand or didn't appreciate the infrastructure piece and having bases and building that out. He has learned from those mistakes and is, I don't want to say overcompensating, but he is very well established in this game. He is the dominant economic force in the game, also militarily, and he's got this great defense network around his homeworld. Also, if you notice, you'll see that there is on his home fleet, Fed home fleet here, is pretty significant, like ridiculously significant. He has a total of 2 of these cruisers, no problem. He's got 7 of these light cruisers, no big deal. He has a total of, 18 of these M-era frigates, nothing to sneeze at. He's got quite a few 11 YFFs, and then he's got a bunch of these, 6 of them, these corvettes. So certainly not the kind of fleet that's going to decimate a homeworld, but a very significant fleet, like nothing to sneeze at. And he's surrounded his homeworld with these YDKs. Let's look at his capital, and you will also see, wow, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jeez Louise, he's got 20 Y-era planetary ground bases. Am I counting that right? No way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, okay. So he's got 20 planetary ground bases surrounding his, or like on his homeworld. Big deal. With a YDK. And he's got 10 on his secondary planet, which is Mars, and a couple, how many? 8? 6. 6 on Luna. So he's got he's very well distributed there, and he hasn't built out any bases specifically on Mars and Luna within his capital system. But as I say, he's got, oh no, sorry, my mistake. That wasn't that's just a troop transport, which is what this is, with 4 G factors. I believe that's 4 G factors. Yeah. And then around his homeworld, he's got this nest of YDKs, just really increasing his ability to perform repairs and then sort of reach out and hit people if he wants to. Let's take a quick look at the Peruvian border. Let's just take ships away for a second. So you can see that they're building, like I say, they're building the YBS. They're building their supply network across the border here. And then a couple hexes back, they have their bases here. They also have YDKs, a YDK over this particular developing planet here. And a number, no sort of big economic developments other than that they're building bases along the perimeter. They've made contact with the Borak, and they've built a base there. Let's bring the ships back so we can see what's there. We can see he's got a cruiser doing some exploration. He's got some an exploration cruiser, which is the YSR, along with a tug. So looking to build probably a base right there, and kind of interacting with the Borak. Also, you can see here that he started repairing a number of these Federation ships, and that they will make their way sort of out of Peruvian space, I'm sure, at some point. They were just exploring their gravity wells, which had not been explored, meaning they had not sent anything through to find out what's on the other side, and away you go. All right. And the last sort of big thing let's take a note of is these things that popped up. Now, there is an earlier part of this game, we had a total of 6 players, and we lost one along the way. And that was significant enough that it could have sort of ended our game. We would have had to like restart. But because we were looking for a way to sort of move the game forward, we introduced this sort of like Borg-like faction, this high-tech juggernaut of a species, literally identified or called the Juggernauts race, that has highly powerful ships and will go in and sort of beat down and destroy beat down and destroy their opponents. What seems to be happening is that they have this ability to launch fleets and ships through wormholes, which is interesting, kind of like transwarp drive with the Borg, I guess, and they just kind of pop up in places. They previously popped up in one spot with the Paravians who had to deal with them, and as you can see, they've popped up in two places here. One is very close to the Borak, one is very close to the Paravians. Where those specific fleets are going to go, I don't know, but it could be interesting to see how they deal with that. Very interesting. So that's where we're at as far as our sit rep with the turn, with the map. Now, let's get into a little bit of the role play and the espionage of what's going on. Let me pull up real quick. I'm going to pull up the email. So we do a lot of this through email as far as the role-playing piece. And what we can do is we'll send role-playing emails back and forth talking about, what's happened in the game or what's going on. And there's a couple of sort of recent events that have occurred. In last turn 88, and in this turn 89, there was some corruption, a random event as far as the game mechanics go, that was negatively impacting one of our planets and its economic output. So there was a decrease of, I think it was 1.8, and then it went to 0.8, and there was just, it was described as corruption, and there was a way you need to be able to deal with the corruption to eliminate it. So this was the response that we had for the corruption. So here we go. So Kangor is the planet on which this was happening. The setting sun of Kangor was majestic. The interplay of the planetary system lit up the sky with streaks of faint plasma as the magnetic poles of the planet interacted with the solar winds of the local star. Streaks of green and orange revealed themselves in the darkening sky as the setting sun fought for its last gasps of life, seeming to set the overcast sky afire with its dying embers of light. From his vantage point, the governor could see the sprawling metropolis before him. The stately mansion, a perk of his station, sat high on the mountainside, overlooking the western approaches of the Kandor Valley and the river delta, the current settlement rested upon. 40 years he had spent in the service of the Klingon High Command. 40 years of toiling dirt and transforming an untamed landscape into the center of industry and economy that Kandor had become. Under his watch, a relic colony of the Old Kings had become the second most important economic center of the empire. Such accomplishments did not come easy or simply. It had required tact, political skill, and ruthlessness when necessary. The recent slew of criminal activity had been merely the most recent in a long line of underhanded attempts to siphon the wealth and success away from the colony. Members of the Klingon High Council, prominent families, and rising criminal factions had all had their moment in the spotlight of his attention. He had survived them all, thrived in fact. Kangor was evidence of that. This last criminal conspiracy had been different. A local Klingon had established a sophisticated network of leveraged contacts to tap into the colony's treasury transfers to the homeworld. It had been so sophisticated it took nearly a year for him to track it down, and he doubted that even the military attaché had understood what he had discovered. 40 years was a long time without recognition, promotion, or prestige. The funds from this latest capture would ensure his comfort and security for the remainder of his time on Kangor, a term that was unlikely to change anytime soon if history were to judge. Sitting at the terminal, he keyed in the governor's security access code and began the transfer of funds to his private and discreet account. After securing the transfer with his genetic marker, a blood-smeared thumbprint, he stood to take in the view. Walking towards the cityscape, the governor didn't notice the shadow move behind him. The blur of darkness moves silently, stopping just behind the confident politician, too distracted with his congratulating himself on his recent fiscal win to be aware of the dagger poised at his back. There was a pressure in his ribs, sharp, stealing his breath as he tried to sip his wine. He stumbled forward, feeling unsteady on his feet. Touching his back where his muscles were spasming, it felt wet and warm. He turned, expecting to see something, but instead, nothing. He looked at his hand. It was slick, with the warm vitae of his family line. The empire cannot stand a thief, Governor. A thief has no honor, and shall die an honorless death. Looking up in confusion, the swimming vision of the shadow stood before him. Standing alone near the terminal he had just used, he reached out with his bloody hand only to collapse as the poison from the blade took full effect. The local paralytic effect was now flowing through the governor's body, and his vision began to falter. Unable to breathe, his panicked stare tried to make out his attacker before the sun set and darkness fell on the house of Duras. The general looked up at his operative as he entered his chambers aboard the dreadnought Regicide. Dropping the bloodied thumb on the desk, the stranger said in a confident tone, "Duras's treachery has been dealt with, and his nest egg has been redistributed to the Fleet Fund." With a broad smile, the general sat back, clasping his fingers. Then it is time to do away with this paltry opponent and move to claim the honor that has been lost to us for decades. So, what'd you think about that? That's a little bit better writing than the original video that I did to launch this campaign. But basically, that's just telling the story, my narrative explanation of how corruption had fallen on the settlement of Kangor. There was a little bit of a typo there. I started putting in Candor instead of Kangor, so I apologize for that. But the governor basically discovered the corruption, tried to steal the corruption, and then, of course, the powers that be neutralized him and took him out. Now, the consequence of that was that planet had previously been in a economic or a happy state. And if we look quickly here at the economics tab, hold on. Let me switch over to this screen. So we'll go to the economics tab, and I will zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. So you can see here the planet of Kangor is a medium planet, medium planet. And as a medium planet, when it gets H plus or helpful attitude, it gets a 0.5 bonus to its economic output. Now, it went from helpful to unfriendly, which meant that we lost that half a point. Excuse me. Not only did we lose half a point, we lost half a point of the benefit, and we incurred half a point of deficit. So we basically lost one economic point in that exchange. So what ends up happening is I'm going to have to bring the attitude up by putting a diplomatic unit on that hex, and there's a mission that diplomats can run that allows them to increase the attitude of planets and colonies. But since we're in this tab, I'm going to zoom in and let's talk about espionage. So before we get into what happened in turn 89, let's talk about what they do. So in this game, there are groups or teams called prime teams. Prime teams are basically, we'll call them covert operations or intelligence teams that can do a number of different things. In the Klingon Empire, we call them dagger teams. Every faction has a slightly different term for them, and that's just a role-playing thing. From the game perspective, they're called prime teams. And so when you look them up in the rules, they're called prime teams. So a couple things here. One, you can see here that there is a 522.0. That is the rule, and there's a bunch of different rule references here that you will see. There's a number next to every one of these, and that is the rule in the rule set that talks about what this particular operation or mission for the prime team is. Now, this doesn't affect all prime team missions, but as an initial thing, most of the prime team missions are affected by your supply range times, in this case, times 1.5. So, for example, our supply is 4. So times 1.5 means our supply is 6. Within 6 hexes of our nearest supply point, we can perform these operations. And where you're conducting a prime team operation, it costs you 2 economic points. So let's go through a couple of these different kinds of missions. So there's disruptions. Disruptions meaning that you are causing an issue or an interrupt in what they're doing. For example, there is interruptions in, we've been building dreadnoughts. You can do that for that or battleships. You can disrupt ship production. So you have to be able to reach in supply the capital hex of the opponent. And by doing that, you need to be able to reach it and then force the cancellation of a size 3 or size 4 ship. You can disrupt the economy and steal. Basically, they lose 10% of their income. So in our case, that would be about 6.1 EP. You can disrupt reaction movements. So there are ships that can respond to attacks in nearby units. And so you can see here there is basically a number you have to roll, and this is all based on dice. The total amount of defense factors that can be influenced by this reduction in reaction movement, again, W, Y, M, or GW. You can see that there. Base construction, fighter production, strategic movement, and the one that we're going to focus on here in a second is disrupt R&D. So you target a specific R&D technology, and then you disrupt, cause 2d6 damage to that RP. So if they haven't discovered a specific milestone technology, you're going to do damage to that technology stream, and they'll do 2d6 damage to it. So could be as much as 12, could be as little as 2, and anything in between. Sabotage. So you can sabotage bases causing damage. You can sabotage planetary ground units. You can cripple a ship, damage carriers. You can do assassinations of special, so for example, diplomatic or prime teams or R&D teams. You can assassinate majors and admirals, which are just other units that can provide benefit to your different operations. You can assist a resistance movement. So there is basically, you can provide, basically, it's like the CIA supplying weapons and arms to disrupting factions that would destabilize governments and things like that. So that's essentially what you're doing. You're potentially destabilizing government. For example, with a minor faction, or you own you had a minor planet and you conquered it, and you're basically supplying a faction of dissenters there that would cause changes in planetary attitude and maybe economic disruptions. Who knows? You can steal. So steal EPs, war plans, which gives you just benefit in combat by +1. You can rescue captured ships, hijack an enemy ship as long as they're crippled. And then you can try and steal technology. So stealing technology is kind of cool, because when you steal technology, you're stealing from the opposing player, assuming that they have a milestone technology above you. For example, let's say in the early part of the game, you're trying to get to phaser 1s. There's a number of different kinds of phasers. Phaser 3, more than this, but there's phaser 3, phaser 2, phaser 1, for example. You've discovered phaser 2s, you're working on phaser 1s, but your neighbor has discovered that technology. Well, you can steal progression towards phaser 1 from them, assuming they've reached that milestone already. Again, Similar to the disrupting technology, you get the 2d6. Information gathering, so you can try and figure out what's going on with another player's R&D progress, or you can gather or plant evidence about certain aspects of role play that you want to sort of create. You can do that. This was this was something that happened. This was something that happened in a previous game where one of the players, and Mike will remember this, planted evidence, spent lots of money to be able to create this this patchwork narrative of how my faction had orchestrated an assassination of my neighbor's leader, and then blamed it on another faction to try and cause them to go to war. So one player planted evidence that I had organized an assassination attempt on the neighbor and then blamed it on somebody else. So involving 4 different players in the game. There were 6. 4 different players in the game. And it took like, I think 4 or 5, maybe even as many as 10 turns to sort out what had happened because of rolling dice and all this kind of stuff. But he spent all this EP to do that. And it was really critical for me because it basically caused a situation for initially those 2 factions to go to war, and then they both went to war with me. And then because they both went to war with me, another player decided to jump in on that game and go to war with me at the same time. So go to war with me at the same time. I had 3-on-1 at one point. And then eventually we sorted out what had happened. And then those 2 factions who had initially fought each other, then fought me, then decided to go after the other player who set this all up. Yes, it was me. Yes, it was very exciting. Quick sip of water here. All right, so let's go back here. So here we have, that's a bunch of the missions that are available for prime teams. You can also see there are diplomatic teams and R&D teams. So for example, when we talk about the increasing planetary attitude, you can see here in row 50, planetary attitude, you can make an attitude roll to improve the planetary attitude of a planet, right? There's a bunch of different things here. Yeah, there's a bunch of other missions that we can explore, and if we get into them or we use them, we'll show that. R&D. This is kind of interesting. So we can do joint research when we're at another faction's homeworld, which is what we're doing with the Tholians, and the Tholians are doing with us. We're doing joint research. R&D, you can do perform while doing shared research, discover total. Okay, so you can do sort of an espionage thing where your research and development team are trying to figure out how much your other faction, like the one you're doing the cooperative research with, is spending on research and development rather. But that could be problematic because you're basically spying on your partner, and that could cause issues in the role-playing aspect. There's the wormhole thing, which we talked about early on in the game. You have to be able to discover a wormhole and then do research and development on the wormhole tech. And then there's this reverse engineering piece, which is going to be interesting when it comes to the Juggernaut faction. The Juggernaut faction has these very advanced ships. If you destroy them and or capture them, then you can examine them and get RP benefits from that. So, something to think about. So these are a bunch of the factions or the missions that have occurred. So, with that said, what happened in turn 89? Let me share with you the email I wrote about it. So again, role-playing stuff. This is the story of what happened. I'll give you the numbers about it after I read the role play, but I'll read you the role play real quick and then we'll go into that. I'm sorry, sir. The data banks were purged before they were destroyed. There is nothing to recover. The Dagger team, remember that's the prime team, the Dagger team senior inspector crouched down for a closer look at the smoldering remains of the overloaded databank. It would seem that the attempt to hide their tracks was clumsy, although their mission was a success. Clearing his throat, the head of the research department stepped closer. Unfortunately, the data that remains might as well have been reduced to slag. It is useless, and will force us to restart our experimentation. The silence lingered, almost too long. The team of senior officials and investigators hanging on the senior inspector's response. Junior scientists glanced at the security team, their intentions hidden under tinted visors and tactical uniforms. The inspector was focused on the remains of the murdered scientists and the wisps of smoke coming from the destroyed databanks, its latent chemical energy burning away the last reactive components. No one spoke. The tension built like a creaking cord slowly under tension. Anxiety felt in the absence of reaction and punctuated by the senior inspector cracking his knuckles, one at a time, each knuckle on his right hand like a ticking clock, counting down to a moment of decision. I will advise the High Council. The site will remain under quarantine until our investigation is complete. The inspector rose and turned to the assembled scientist. I would encourage you to resume your work quickly and have progress to report. I would not expect the High Council to take this news kindly. Stepping into his shuttle, the inspector's communicator vibrated. Keying the activation, he spoke as he took a seat in the aft section. Yes? Report, Inspector. The voice on the other end of the comm signal was stern and short. I have a brief list of suspects and the initial indications of what was damaged and or taken. I will make my full report shortly. Inspector, let's dispense with the formality. Very well. I will not make a final determination yet. I expect I will have definitive proof in short order. Once I have it, I will advise you before I submit my final report. Excellent. We will have completed our operations here shortly. Have your report finished by the time we return to the homeworld. I am eager to understand who the enemies of the Empire are and what action needs to be taken. I will. The comm signal terminated. The door of the shuttle closed. The interior lighting switched to red, and the shuttle lifted off. En route to the capital, the inspector contemplated the fate of the Empire and how the Council would react if his suspicions were correct. The Empire was dishonorably attacked. What will be the cost to satisfy the Empire's honor? So, if you can figure that out, basically, there was a faction that conducted one of those sabotage missions on our R&D. And they performed a significant amount of damage on our R&D. And what's interesting about this, for those of you who are catching this on the replay, here's the really important piece of this little story. Remember I talked about initiative before? There are 2 factions in the game that go before we do. There's 5 total. We're in the middle as far as the economy goes, and there's only 2 that go before us. They are the Tholians and the Paravians. Now, one thing to think about is that in this game, you can hire, contract, pay more to have Orion pirates conduct missions like this. And Orion pirates will always operate first, in the sense of they are a minor faction. Minor factions will have a lower economy and will always have initiative over player factions. So, a player faction, if a player faction directly did this action against us, 2 things have to occur. 1, they have to have a prime team on their homeworld, and 2, they have to obviously spend the money to conduct the operation and have supply to us. Well, both the Tholians and the Paravians have supply to us. And let's take a quick look at the map. So you will see that at the Paravian homeworld, there is no prime team. Interesting. The Tholian homeworld also doesn't have a prime team. Interesting. Let's just do a quick look. Maybe there's something hidden in home fleet, right? Where are you, Paravians? There you are. Paravian home fleet. Nope. No prime team there. Oh, there is a prime team with the Dreadnought. Okay. It's possible they could use that. I mean, it's possible. Nothing in their patrol. Go to the capital. Yeah. I mean, it's possible they could have used the prime team that was based in Home Fleet. That's possible. Let's go to the Tholian Home Fleet and just check and see what they got. Tholian Home Fleet. Nope. No prime team there. So the only faction that has supply to us, that had initiative over us, because we had guarded that the technology that they attacked, the only faction who could have done that, based on what we're seeing here, is possibly the Paravians, because they have a prime team in and around their homeworld. Or it was an Orion operation. And the thing about the Orion pirates is that right now we know that the... oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong side of the screen here. We know that the Federation has an Orion pirate faction here. Now, technically, according to how we're running the game, there are Orion factions everywhere. And so you can just reach out and contact Orion pirates and away we go. But three options. 1, it was the Paravians. 2, it was the Tholians. And 3, it was an Orion faction. If it was an Orion, then somebody contracted them. And then who would benefit from contracting them to sort of do that to us? Well, possibly, I mean, definitely any of the factions that are bordering us. So any of those other 2 and the Federation. So any one of those 3. The Federation are not particularly threatened by us, I don't think, because, I mean, look at what they've got on the border with us. But maybe they're kind of slow on their base tech, and they want to make sure that we stay slow on our base tech too. That's possible. That could happen. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe they hired an Orion faction to go to war with us, or sorry, do that hit and run on us, and that's what happened. Okay, that's possible. If it was the Paravians, again, they have supply to us. Why would they do that? From the game map perspective, there's no reason for them to do it. Like, there's no particular, other than like just they want to sort of keep things as equal as possible for as long as possible. So it doesn't quite make sense why they would do it other than to just stir the pot. And knowing the player, looking at you, Mike, who plays this faction, he's all about stirring the pot. So this is so in character for Mike. There we go. Comments are coming. Let me read. If I may, he says, since I was so sneaky in the past, Orions always have supply to players' homeworlds. Yeah, that's what we were talking about, in the sense that Orions can always do these missions. You can always contract them out. Also, initiative matters only for movement and combat. Events are sloshed together according to my understanding of things. So this is an important thing to note. I asked this same question to the game master who's running the game. He's the one running the Borak faction. And just like anything else in the game, things progress in initiative turns. So when it comes to when you spend EP to perform a prime team mission, that goes in sequence. So, for example, Paravians go, or let's say the Tholians go, then the Paravians go, then the Klingons go. Paravians do all their economics, and they set up some prime teams to guard some technologies or whatever. Tholians do the same. And then the Klingons, let's say, we're the ones doing the prime team steel research thing. Well, we can't do that as successfully because the Paravians had their turn before us. They had established a guard on that technology. When we go and raid it or steal it, that makes that much more difficult, and or we fail. If it was the other way around and we conduct that operation before they have the ability to guard it, then there's a much greater chance of success. It's just a roll. And the issue isn't around guarding it or having sort of like a counter to it, but rather just the success of the operation. So in this context, just like when we're doing building and different phases of the turn, this happens early on during the sort of the operational, or sorry, after the build phase and the operation phase when we do operations like that. But it's all based on initiative and it goes in sequence. So in this case, it would have been Tholians, Paravians, and then us. Now, with that said, Mike is right in the sense that when it comes to minor factions, it's all sloshed together. So because all those minor factions are smaller than us, Orions will always go first, followed by the minor factions. All the minor factions are pretty much equal from a mechanic perspective, so they'll go first before player factions, and then the players go in their sequence. So that's how that works. So in this case, the question is, who did it? And then what are we going to do about it afterwards? Well, without revealing what's going on at this point, because this is where things start to get sneaky, right? So because in this game we are playing this sort of in real time. These live streams come to you in real time. You can see what's happening as we get the turns back, and players, other player factions like Mike, for example, watching this right now, is watching what we're doing. I'm not going to show you our balance sheet. I'm not going to show you what we're doing in the back end. If you want access to that, then I would strongly recommend heading over to our Patreon at Star Trek Lost Stars patreon.com/Lost Stars. And you can join our Patreon and have access to our private Discord channel where we will have live tactical sessions where we will discuss exactly what we're doing on the balance sheet, where we're moving ships, what we're doing, and how that's all playing out. Depending on your level of participation with the Patreon or your level of support, if you want to do that, thank you so much. And it will be, depending on whether you take control of your own ship, a task group, a fleet, or you are a governor of a province, you have your say and participate in what we are going to do. From a warrior to a governor, you get to participate in those discussions. And if you are controlling specific units, you get to play out in cooperation, of course, with the other patrons on the Patreon. We get to discuss and come up with our tactics and our strategy for moving forward. So if that's something that sounds of interest to you and you want to participate in the game that way, then please head over to patreon.com/Lost Stars and you can check that out. Otherwise, if you want to see what happens in turn 90, which is the next turn that's coming, or you want to see how this evolves, then please hit the subscribe button, hit the follow on Twitch, and give us a thumbs up and let us know that you are liking what you're seeing, because those updates are coming soon for you. By the end of this weekend, we should have some updates on the turn, and I'll be able to let you know what is going on. But as for right now, all that stuff is top secret. We're going to keep that behind our protective barrier there so that factions like Mikael cannot get in there. So Mike says, did you receive my email this morning? Please don't show me. I don't want to know, he says. Yeah. So speaking of roleplay, let's dive into the response from the Paravians. Very interesting. All right. Okay. So first of all, a little bit of, let me give you a little situational awareness. So as you know, there are a number of border regions or areas of operation that we have on the map when it comes to the Klingon Empire. We have the top right section with the ISC fleet that we're fighting. We have our area along the Tholian, the Paravian, and then, of course, the Federation border down south. Each one of these sections is compartmentalized into an area commander. Those area commanders, depending on what ship they're using as their flagship, will have a certain rank and the number of units that they are controlling. If they are operating on a dreadnought or higher, then they are a general. If they are operating on anything less, they are a colonel and have area control over what's happening. The area around the Paravian border is under the control of Brigadier General Kempek. He is operating out of the C4 that is that you can see here, and a small task group of escort destroyers. So that's what's going on there. So he's the one operating in the border area with the Paravians. So in response to what had happened, we received the following message. Colonel Kempek, the news coming out of your realm is most concerning. And this is, of course, in response to the role-playing email I put out talking about the assassination of those scientists, the destruction of the databanks, and so on. We, too, in the past few months, had a sabotage attempt at a warp engine research facility. Thankfully, it was a computer virus that was detected before it breached a firewall to adjacent systems, but not before burning out the computer it was inserted into. The most alarming fact is that there was some evidence that pointed to the origin being from the Klingon Empire. I find that funny. The only reasons that we are not sending a defensive fleet to your border are the suspiciousness that you would be hit at the same time as us, and the fact that long-range sensors have detected not one but two juggernaut gravity rifts opening up to our south in the vicinity of Botel. That's the ship that we sent through that gravity rift, and our southeastern border. It would be highly out of character for an honorable culture to strike in such an underhanded way, and it is our hope that you were not behind this, for it would surely sour our relations. In that event, I am not certain I could hold back the raiding clans from rash actions. Stonefeather. So this is a very rational response to something that has happened. One of the things that's occurred back and forth between us on the Paravian border is transparency and communication. We've talked about this in a couple times in a couple of emails back and forth, and maintaining that transparency is very important. Quick sip. So this email is in the spirit of that, which is good. However, it is very suspicious to me as a player that Mike is sending me this message after I put out the narrative around what happened to us. Now, if Mike had done, or any player faction had done this mission, they would receive news on their turn sheet that would indicate that they were successful in this hit and run, in this stealing of technology or disruption of R&D. So they would have reported on their turn sheet that had happened. Okay. So they know the response one way or the other. So two things. One, this is a guilty conscience. This is either a guilty conscience trying to mitigate, massage, and control the message, and try and sort of reach out and redirect potential blame, or it's genuine. And what's happening to us is what Mike had done to other players in a previous game, which is this sort of tapestry of covert operations and information planting that creates a dynamic where two factions go to war. And they didn't necessarily need to, and they weren't intending on it. It was just that someone set up information to make them do that. So, from a player perspective, this is right up Mike's alley. This is exactly what he does, and it's hard to believe that Mike didn't do it. That being said, knowing the players who were actually playing the game, I could definitely see at least one or two of those other players setting it up this way, because there's this kind of pre-established pattern of behavior that certain players have, and if you're basically creating a narrative that plays to one of those pre-existing patterns of behavior, even if that player is not doing it this time, it lends itself to that kind of dynamic, right? Makes things interesting. And I know one particular player who I could definitely see doing that. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's what's going on. There's no way to know at this point one way or the other, only like suspicions, right? From a mechanics perspective, we know exactly who did what when, meaning that the faction that did this either hired Orions or Based on what's on the map, it was the Paravians because they're the only ones that had a prime team on their capital. So it's the Paravians or it's Orions. If it's Orions, it could be anybody. And obviously, if it's the Paravians, we know it's Paravians. Before anything happens, we got to figure out what's going on because there's ways to, as I showed you there, there's ways and missions that you can run to be able to find out information and figure out what exactly happened. So we'll have to figure that out. We'll have to sort that out. We'll have to see what's happening in that regard and kind of walk that path forward and see what happens. But regardless of what happens, as far as playing and using espionage and using spies in this game, that is how this all comes together. You can really stir up the pot when it comes to player-on-player interactions by doing stuff like this. You can create distrust. You can create suspicion. And especially if you are trying to, for example, the Batman faction is on the polar opposite side of the map from where I am. And the Paravians are in the middle. If that faction, because they have the economic flexibility to do it, if they wanted to, they could have initiated this combination of operations to try and instigate a war with Paravians and Klingons. If they did, then typically what happens is that everyone gathers their units on the front, right? So you have all their military units against each other, and there's a big fight. If that happened, that would pull all the military units away from the southern border, most likely from the Borak and the Paravians. And the Borak, if they want to, could cross over. If that was the case, then let's just take a quick look at the map and see why that could or could not work. There's nothing there. There is no advantage right now to do that. There's no resources that are within spitting distance of the border. There's no reason why the Borak would want to do that. No one, in fact, has any significant numbers of resources along the border to cause that kind of an issue. The only faction who would potentially benefit from a conflict between the Paravians and the Klingons at this time would be the Federation. If the Federation did it, then that would indicate... So, for example, if the Federation did it and the Paravians and the Klingons went to war, one of two things could occur. The Federation could choose to get involved in such a way as to support one faction or the other. So let's say they support the Klingons or they support the Paravians. Either way, they do one of those two things and they move in and they take something. In this case, it is most likely that they would support the Paravians because, one, the Paravians are the smaller faction economically and militarily. So they would want to balance, if they're playing classic feds, so to speak, they want to balance it out. And from a purely territorial, like smash and grab perspective, they can very easily and very quickly cross the border here in the southern section and grab the 5 resources that are up here right now. That makes sense. Like, that would be the play that would make sense. A quick bump in economic points and a quick grab. And once you grab control of this wormhole, it's probably unlikely that I'm going to be able to get through on the other side. Also, from a strategic perspective, you grab a hold of that wormhole, it's a quick hop and jump to get to the other side and then smash the Klingon homeworld. So if you need an excuse to go to war with the Klingons, that would be it. Again, there's nothing really to grab on the Paravian side of the border with the feds. Let's just take away the ships and the bases for a second. There's like 3 resources, and it's a bit of a stretch to get there. Maybe this here. But really, all this along the border is the real smash and grab goal that I would see if I was in that position. That's what would make sense to me. All right, to the comments. Mike says, they might be interested in both of us. So here's a quick little interesting dynamic on this game. Again, these are people, players playing this game, having fun with each other. The player who was playing the Federation not too long ago said he needs some room to stretch. Or no, some breathing room. I think was it breathing room? He needs a reason to stretch, and he would need some breathing room. I think that was the quote. Mike, do you remember exactly what it was that Andre said? I'm not sure. Quick sip for water on my end. Yeah. So Mike's making reference to the Germans wanting breathing room when they took over Yugoslavia. And living room. And so that's essentially what we're talking about here, is the Federation could do something like that. And as I say, when I look at the long game, from the Fed perspective, they've got the biggest military and the biggest economy. It would make sense to just do that quick little push and flex a little bit. Take that little section, that little southern section, and control that wormhole, because it would be the strategic sort of benefit that would come out of that. It is disproportionately more advantageous for them to do that than I can see anything on the previous side. Again, more resources in closer proximity and that wormhole. Those two things alone would be a reason to go to war. But if they go to war with the Klingons just straight up on their own, I don't know. I don't think that the Feds right now could take that wormhole on their own, because the wormhole's in such close proximity to my shipyards. Like, I can put ships there very quickly and easily, and it would just be extremely difficult for them to do it. Now, here's a question for you. Oh, Mike says, because I got hit in my own R&D, and it looks like it was you. Oh, sorry, hold on. Second fleet is on my border. Third is on yours. Because I got hit. So Mike got hit in his own R&D, and it looks like it was you. Yeah. So whoever's playing this game is trying to get us to fight, Mike and me. So the Pravens and the Klingons. So if that's the game that's being played here, and they want us to fight, and we can find evidence that it was another faction. So, for example, let's say we do our operations and we figure out that it was let's say it was the Orions, and it was the Orions at the behest of the Federation. So we know that the Federation is trying to stir stuff up. Try to keep this PG. Between us, between the Pravens and the Klingons. Now, if that was the case, what's interesting about that is that there's this little peak where both the Klingons and the Pravians can attack the Feds. We can concentrate more units, more forces, more overall firepower in that area than he can. We can overwhelm him, because while the Pravians currently don't have MTech that I'm aware of, let's just take a quick look at their fleet composition in their home fleet. Yeah, so you've got Y airships everywhere. So I don't know how close you are to MTech, but right now you've got Y airships deployed. So between your Y airships and my M airships, we can do a lot of damage quickly. Let's just take away the ships for a sec, and let's just take away the bases. Look at the economic distribution here. So there's a quick 3 resources right here. Within spitting distance, again, these 2 resources are on the border with both of us, and these 2 are within spitting distance of it. So we could conceivably, in a coordinated attack, we could very quickly take 5 EP away from him. Let's say, whatever the distribution is, whoever gets what. And we could go as far as taking away 7, most likely. In addition, we could cause significant damage to his base infrastructure along the border here. And because there would be 2 of us on one, there would be a lot of opportunity to be able to cause significant, I want to say damage, but just be able to cause cause a reason for him to pause, to say, oh, damn, or whatever. So let's say we did a proportional response and we claimed he did damage to both. So let's map this out. If we have evidence that it was the Federation, is a question to the Paravians, Mike. Would the Paravians be open to a proportional response against the faction that sponsored the act? So if it was the Federation that sponsored the act, and you and I are both bordered with the Federation, would you be in support of a proportional response against the Federation? And what would a proportional response mean? I am eyeballing the chat. Do-do-do. Do-do-do. Do-do. This is always the fun part in these live streams, because Mike is good enough to be consistent in showing up for these. And you get to see a little bit of the interaction between some of the players in real time versus some of the more email stuff, which I was sharing earlier. While Mike is thinking about his potential response, and if Mike, if you don't want to say anything, just, you know, give me a NA or something like that. Oh, here we go. So he says, likely yes. I'd be deep raiding and likely R&D raids. Okay, so there's R&D raids. What about a military operation crossing the border and causing damage? Like, so for example, let's say a combination of the two, since raiding is the Paravian strength. Okay, so what if we did a, let's see, let's just look at what's here on the border. Okay, let me just switch over. So this is the map without the bases on it. So the Paravians could pop out. So there is a YDK right there. But if the Paravians popped out using your wormhole or your gravity well, and you were able to operate independently with that, what's it called? That module that you have on the tug, you could do a deep raid and do one of two things. You could not only raid the colony, but this planet that's right here. So you could raid that, hit that planet, and then sort of fall back. And if it was in a coordinated effort, we could collectively decimate the border area along here. Like, basically, we'll call it the triangle. So there's this triangle that goes from the, what's that? The Victor column or the Victor row over to the 34, we'll call it. So 34, maybe 35, because 35 is where that wormhole comes out. So we could do a kind of a punch in between the Victor, between Mike and Victor, and between 30 and 35, let's say. So like something close to like a 20 hex box where we could just decimate bases, and we could pillage resources and raid in that way. And like you say, you could also do R&D raids and other things like that. What do you think? So as he was saying, Paravians, have some technologies that give them the benefit to raiding. And also Mike's sort of role-playing aspect of the Paravians is that they are kind of like the Mongol horde. So they kind of like, they sweep across the landscape and do these kinds of raids. So we could look into that as a possible outcome. But hey, you know what? It might not be the Feds at all. It could be the Borak. It could be the Tholians. It would be funny to me if it was the Tholians, because if it was the Tholians, not only is that not like the player who's playing the Tholians, sounds like a potential plan, he says, if we prove he was the culprit. So let's do some research and figure out who it was that sent this team to do damage. We'll figure out who it was first, and once we figure out who it was, we'll come up with a plan in real time for all of you to see. And you'll be able to see what's going on, and you'll be able to watch our battle plan as it unfolds. So from the Klingon perspective and a role-playing perspective, it's really simple. This kind of attack is considered to be, from our perspective, highly dishonorable. It has high impact, meaning it did damage to something that we really didn't want damage done to. It was it wasn't like calling out in sort of like, if you want to think of like traditional samurai one-on-one personal combat. It was not like I'm calling you out and we'll go face to face. It was an underhanded, in the shadows, devious kind of attack, and you're not willing to be able to stand up and take accountability for what you did. That's dishonorable. Like a thief in the night stealing from the Klingon Empire, that's what happened here. Highly dishonorable. In order for honor to be satisfied, some significant and disproportional cost needs to be paid. A cost that is, well, a proportional response might be, let's say, an R&D attack for an R&D attack. In this case, there has to be a disproportional compensation for not only the damages done to the technology, but also to the honor of the Klingon Empire. And so for honor to be satisfied, we must identify and sort of come out on top in the interaction with that opponent, whoever that culprit is who did that thing. We gotta go over top and sort of dominate in our response to whatever it was that occurred. Lots of different ways this could play out. Depends on who did it. Depends on what we find out. And if you want to be able to follow along with that, see where this goes, then please subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitch, give us a thumbs up, and let us know that this is the kind of stuff that you like to see. Put your comments in below. Who do you think it was? Do you think it was the Praevians? Do you think it was the Feds? Who do you think has the most to learn or the most to gain from causing us to go back and forth? Are the Praevians really the victims of this, or are they architects? Is it the Federation that's kind of trying to set us against each other, or another faction, the Tholians or otherwise? Mike says right now, though, my biggest concern are the Juggernaut fleets. So these Juggernaut fleets that showed up in the south of the map. Totally agree. Those Juggernaut fleets are a concern, and it would be great if they would head over to the Federation, because obviously the Federation are the biggest folks in the game. It'd be nice to see the Juggernauts attack the Feds. Let me put this right out there, Mike. If you need help dealing with those Juggernaut fleets, we'd be willing to send a significant fleet through and down through the neutral zone. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I can send a fleet and then send a tug to be able to provide supply, and we can send a fleet down that way to be able to support against the Juggernaut fleet if need be. You let me know how you want to do with that. But we are now almost an hour and a half into this live stream. Thank you so much for having followed us. If you've stayed with us this long in the conversation, thank you so much for being with us. You could do the wormhole plan, he says. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Like I said, if you are following along and you want to see what happens next, then please hit the subscribe button. Follow us along on Twitch. If you are interested in participating in this game, then please put your comments in the video and let us know that you are interested in playing this game. If you are loving this so much and you would like to support us through Patreon, then please head over to patreon.com/LostStars, and you can find ways to be able to participate as part of the Klingon Empire in this game if you so choose. Either way, it's been a pleasure having you along so far, and I look forward to seeing you in the next live stream. Bye for now.